So this is the 7th webinar in the series focused on community-defined practices for ethnic and cultural populations, brought to you by the California Institute for Mental Health, our Center for Multicultural Development, and presented by our partners, the Sacramento Native American Health Center. We'd like to thank our sponsors, the Mental Health Services Act, and the Department of Healthcare Services for supporting this webinar series. Our webinar today, entitled Lost in Translation, Telling Our Story, is intended to set the foundation for a 3-part series that presents an overview of the current health status and demographics of Native Americans in California, with an introduction to salient behavioral health issues and their linkage to historical and current factors. It's a privilege to have with us today's facilitator, Ms. Barbara Aragon. Ms. Aragon is a Laguna Pueblo and draws from over 30 years of experience working in Native communities and leadership in the continental United States, the U.S. territories, and in the Pacific Basin. In her years working on social issues with Native American communities, Ms. Aragon has administered trainings and technical assistance, taught cultural competency and social work practice, worked with tribes, universities, federal agencies, and organizations on developing ways to improve community-based programs. Her passion is teaching storytelling and digital storytelling as a culturally appropriate approach to healing and empowerment and within the Native American communities. Also with us today are today's presenters, Dr. Melissa Leal, and also Albert Titman Sr. Dr. Melissa Leal is a descendant of the Ohlone and Assimilation peoples of Monterey, California. She received an undergraduate degree in ethnic studies from the California State University in Sacramento and earned her PhD in Native American Studies from UC Davis in 2012. Her research examines linguistic and cultural revitalization and empowerment as it relates to contemporary art and performance. Dr. Leal is an adjunct faculty member in Native American Studies at CSU Sonoma. In addition to her position as a professor, she is also the Behavioral Health Program Manager at the Sacramento Native American Health Center, Incorporated. As a lifetime resident of Sacramento County, she also works on revitalizing Assimilation language and teaches dance, jewelry making, and classes on revitalizing indigenous languages. Our next presenter, Mr. Albert Titman Sr., is of Miwok descent and is affiliated with the Ione Band of Miwok Indians. He is a registered addiction specialist through the Brining Institute of California and a state-certified alcohol and drug abuse counselor. He works at the Sacramento Native American Health Center, Incorporated as an addiction treatment counselor and provides alcohol drug abuse assessment, diagnosis, and treatment to individuals, couples, families, and groups to achieve more satisfying and productive marriage, family, and social adjustment. In addition to working at the Sacramento Native American Health Center, Mr. Titman provides culturally sensitive services. He enjoys Miwok traditional ceremonial singing and dancing, as well as coaching youth sports, playing basketball, and cooking for his family. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Ms. Barbara Aragon.
And I want to thank CIMH for allowing this opportunity for not only ourselves but the other ethnic populations. I was pleased to be able to dial into those webinars also. But as said, my name is Barbara Aragon. I'm Laguna Pueblo, and I'm going to be the moderator for the webinar series. And so a primary goal for this particular webinar is to continue the discourse around evidence-based practice and community-defined practice. As many of you know, this is a conversation that's been going on in Indian country for many years, and it's a conversation that's often highly charged. Often programs and tribes are required by funders to utilize evidence-based practices, even though the research that earned the program the EBP designation most often didn't occur among Native people. On the other hand, community-defined practices, which most often are based on indigenous practice and values and incorporate cultural elements that have been passed on from generation to generation, are not often approved for use. One of our webinar presenters, Esther Lucero, when speaking about community-defined practice, states, "They are standalone methods developed and used by tribal people long before the concept of EVP existed. There is a need for funders to respect these practices as autonomous mental health strategies," unquote. These community-driven practices often include songs, stories, and ceremonies. And you're going to hear about that today. You're going to hear stories, and that's one of the things that I would like to emphasize. Sometimes we'll look at a webinar, or we will, the EVPs, and as Native people, we always are adjusting to those formats. And so what you're going to hear, you're of course going to see PowerPoint, and you're going to see demographics, and you're going to see data on the screen. But you're also going to hear storytellers here. You're going to hear singers here, and talking about the importance of ceremony, and because that's what makes up our very cultural DNA, is the stories, the songs, and the ceremonies. So the objective for today's session is going to be that you all will have an understanding of the demography and diversity of the Native American population in California. You're also going to receive a historical overview from the Native American perspective, and also you'll be provided an overview of the mental health issues among Native Americans living in California today. But before we get started, I want to do a trailer or a preview of the coming webinars just to make sure you all are coming back. Today, as introduced, we have speakers from the Sacramento Native American Health Center. But on March 5th, Dr. Art Martinez, a Chumash psychologist who works at the Shingle Springs Rancheria, will discuss the enduring factors of historical trauma and the importance of culturally appropriate trauma-informed approaches in behavioral health. During that same webinar, Kutcha Risley-Baldy will present on the revival of the flower dance, the Hupa Women's Puberty Ceremony. And I'm really looking forward to that because I haven't seen that presentation yet, and here it's wonderful. The final webinar on March 19th will feature Esther Lucero, who is the Director of Programs and Strategic Development for the California Consortium for Urban Indian Health, and one of this webinar's organizational co-hosts. Esther is going to discuss in detail the evidence-based practice system and the importance of using the Indigenous Research Agenda model. This webinar will also feature 2 examples of practice-based evidence that are popular and used frequently in Indian country. And that's the White Bison Wild Variety Curriculum and the Gathering of Native Americans, our Gona Prevention Curriculum. Overview of these healing curriculum will be presented by Carlos Rivera and Gail Zepeda, who are both Pomo. And though the individuals presenting today and for the other webinars are experts in their field, I do want to mention some of the other organizations and individuals that contributed to this presentation and are working on healing and wellness in California, because they're also resources to this audience. One is the Native American Health Center in Oakland, which has a wealth of experience in research and provision of technical assistance to tribes and tribal organizations in the area of behavioral health. There's also California Rural Indian Health Board and their Epicenter, and the Indian Health Center of Santa Clara, who have taken leadership in convening a historical trauma action committee and are collaborating with Stanford University in the area of historical trauma and the impact on health. And they were helpful in providing information and PowerPoints for this presentation. Also, Dr. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart, who is recognized internationally for her work in historical trauma, and she graciously provided resources for the webinar also. Also, Intertribal Council of California, who have developed a cultural competency training that they deliver throughout the state. There are certainly other individuals and organizations that will be mentioned and credited throughout the webinar series, but I just wanted to emphasize that all of these organizations and individuals are most gracious in providing their services and expertise to everyone. But with that, I want to get started on this part 1 of the Native American webinar. And as stated before, the title is Lost in Translation, Telling Our Story. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Melissa Leal.
Thank you, Barbara. I would like to offer a prayer to get us started today. So I'm going to offer the prayer in my language, in the Esalen language. And I think it's a testament to the title of this presentation, Lost in Translation. And so as we go throughout this presentation, I'll be explaining the importance of language to me and to all indigenous communities. Lash'od no ayam. Nimasian el pasoleki. Nishushai. Nishafehe loliki. Asana. Nimasian. Pektin ayu. Nimasian el pasoleki. Creator, thank you. My soul feels good to be here today. Thank you to the ancestors and to my beautiful people. Thank you for the water. Together we stand united. Oh. Enilepa Melissa Leal, Eni Eselenk, Eni Olonenk, Eni Sacramentono, Ni Masian el Pasaleki. Good day. My name is Melissa Leal. I am Esalen and Ohlone. I am from Sacramento. The Esalen and Ohlone people are from the greater Monterey Bay region. My ancestors were enslaved at Mission Carmel and Mission San Juan Bautista, and that is a story of historical trauma, which Albert is going to talk about later, and it's all going to tie together. My people, of which I will tell more of the story later, are considered extinct. We no longer exist. Our language no longer exists. And so today, as I sit here talking to you, I make a testament of my existence, as an Esalen woman, and as a descendant of Esalen people. I also make a testament of the existence of my language and that it can be brought back. It was only sleeping, but it is here. And so as we go throughout this webinar today, Barbara, Albert, and I both want you to not only think about the atrocities and the historical trauma, but to understand the resilience of Native people, to understand that we still exist. We don't look like what you see on TV all of the time, but we are here. We live, we love, we're human beings. Some of the general population facts for the United States. There are 565 federally recognized tribes, plus an unknown number of tribes that are not federally recognized. The tribe that I descend from, the Ohlone, Costano, and Esalen Nation, is not a federally recognized tribe, basically because at one point they said that we didn't exist. Anthropologists and politicians said that we no longer exist, and there's a reason for that. And I'll go into that a little bit later. In addition to that, when we say Native Americans, we have an impression of what Native Americans look like, that there's a Native American language, that there's a Native American culture, and that just isn't true. There are commonalities between our languages and our cultures. There are things that we share, like worldviews and aspects of our spirituality, but each of these tribes, these federally recognized tribes and non-federally recognized tribes, have their own culture, their own beliefs, and their own languages, their own ceremonies. They're unique groups of people. So to say Native American is to say that we're a family of uniqueness. We're a group of people that have come together from many groups of people. In 2010, there were roughly 5.2 million American Indian Alaska Natives living in the United States, which represented 1.7% of the population. So you can see when something only represents 1.7% of something, it usually gets neglected when it comes to policies. And so that's just something to think about as we go along. However, that 1.7% is 5.2 million individual human beings. And so the importance of each of those human beings should be paid attention to and not neglected. They say in 2050 that there will be 8.6 million American Indians and Alaska Natives in the United States. So what that says is we continue to grow. Another testament to our resiliency. In 2010, several tribes had groupings with 100,000 or more responses. So people were recognizing themselves as Cherokee, as Navajo, as Choctaw, as Mexican American Indian, as Chippewa, as Sioux, as Apache, as Blackfeet. Those were the biggest results of tribes that people marked in the census. There are 15 states with more than 100,000 American Indians and Alaskan Native residents. In 2010, California had the largest American Indian and Alaskan Native population, and I believe it's the same today. California is only, Oklahoma is second to California. There's a reason why California has the largest American Indian population. I'm going to go into that in a minute. And then just for health reasons, the percentage of American Indian Alaskan Natives who lacked health insurance was 29.2% in 2010. So my area of specialty, or the area that I like to talk about, is California, and that's because I'm California Indian. That's because I live in California, and you know, the land and the environment runs in my blood, and so I have a passion of teaching people about California Indians. There are currently 109 federally recognized tribes in California, and with my tribe, the Ohlone Costanoan Esalen Nation, if you can see on the map on where the Monterey coast would be, Esalen is kind of a very small little purple section. So my tribe is recognized, the individuals are recognized as descendants of the California Judgment Roll. However, federally, we're not recognized. The reason for that is because Monterey was a place where missions were established. There's, you know, you do your 4th grade mission project, you take your kids to the missions, and they build their mission, and they get a great grade, and they talk about Father Sarah and how wonderful of a man he was. But for us, they were basically slave plantations. For my ancestors, they were forced into these missions. They were killed sometimes in the missions. They were abused in the missions. And so the population of people went down. And we're going to go into this more with the historical trauma piece. But I just want you to recognize that when people were taken into the missions, they didn't always survive for a very long time. In addition, people didn't want to go to the missions because they knew that they were not good places to be. And so they ran. They ran into the mountains and they hid. And so later when anthropologists came to say, oh, who's an Esalen person, who speaks the Esalen language, there was nobody there that was willing to say that they could, or they were in the mountains hiding. And so historically, they say that, you know, we just melted into Hispanic society, and so the Esalen part of us never existed. But it exists, and we're here. Specifically in Sacramento, there's tribes from many different groups: Nisenan, Maidu, Valley Miwok, Patwin, Wintun peoples. There's many, many different tribes in our area. I think it's important for us to learn about the tribes of our area, wherever we are in California, because we need to recognize that those cultures are unique and specific to that area, and we can learn different things from them. Before the roundup of California Indians, villages varied in size from 2 dozen to as many as several hundred individuals. So that's just to kind of give you an idea of what villages look like before people started getting put onto land or what we call reservations and rancherias. Another reason why California has such a high population of American Indians is, one, that we have over 126 traditional California tribal groups. But then in 1956 and in other years, the Indian Relocation Act happened. The Indian Relocation Act was an act that the government put into place mainly to address the Indian problem. And historically, we've been seen as a problem. And so how do we fix this problem? And I keep saying that because I don't like that word. But this was the word that was being used in laws and in policies at that time. And so how can we solve this problem? Well, if we make Indian people not so much Indian anymore, we take away their culture, we take away their language, we take away their identities, then they're no longer a problem. They're just, members of society. There are many ways that this assimilationist tactic was used. The one I'm going to talk to you about right now is the Indian Relocation Act. So it was a United States law intended to encourage, keyword, Native Americans in the United States to leave Indian reservations, acquire vocational skills, and assimilate into the general population. Part of the Indian termination policy of that era, it played a significant role in increasing the population of urban Indians in succeeding decades. At a time when the U.S. government was decreasing subsidies to Indians living on reservations, the Relocation Act offered to pay moving expenses and provide some vocational training for those who were willing to move from the reservations to certain government-designated cities. So, an example of this would be you're an Indian person, a Navajo, living on the Navajo reservation, is told, hey, we will send you to Sacramento, California, and we will get you training, and we will find you a job, and your life will be so much better than living on this reservation. In reality, that person was sent to Sacramento, California. The training was not always provided. The housing was not necessarily livable. And these people became what we call urban Indians. And I don't necessarily like that term, but I think that it represents a connection that people made at that time. Here are Indian people from all over the United States being placed in cities like Sacramento, San Francisco, Oakland, Los Angeles, Detroit, different cities all over the United States, and they had to find something. They had to survive. And again, we talk about the resiliency, and they survived by finding other Indian people and creating community and sharing culture and practicing ceremony. And so these are the ways that they were able to maintain who they were, their identity, even when the government was trying so hard to change them. While all areas of urban Indian country share similar challenges of housing, education, employment, healthcare, and maintaining united families with cultural values and connection, the Sacramento region is unique. There's a combination of local tribal people, the Miwok, the Patwin, the Wintun that I spoke about earlier, and welcome tribal family from other states like Laguna Pueblo people, like Barbara, who create a cultural richness that is rare and distinct. So Sacramento is just a plethora of Native American culture. It's local tribal culture. It's culture from all over the tribal regions in the United States because of certain acts like the Relocation Act. This is what constitutes our community. Indian people care about the community and each other, whether they live in the city or on the reservation, whether they are home or if this is where they made their home. Rather than simply occupying a space within this melting pot of a mainstream urban society, we are trying to create our own unique position as dual citizens of at least two nations, fully able to function in the modern world through a belief and reliance on traditional tribal values. Some of the health disparities, the 10 leading causes of death for American Indians in 2009. I like to for me, the suicide is the biggest one to pay attention to because it affects our youth. And we have atrocious numbers of youth who are committing suicide. And it has to do with the historical trauma. It has to do with living conditions. It has to do with access to resources. But the reality is that there are programs in our communities that are addressing these issues, and you're going to hear about them. You're going to hear a little bit about some of it today. You're going to continue to hear about it in the other webinars. One of my favorite things and what my research focuses on is hip-hop culture and how Native American youth really can use hip-hop to revitalize their languages, to revitalize their culture, to affirm their identity as natives. And there's an example of a group called Arctic Hip Hop. You can look that up. But it's a social worker who created a group of hip-hop artists, and he takes them to these villages up in the north in the Arctic, these native villages, and he brings the culture of hip-hop to the culture of the Arctic, and he meshes them, and he does social work throughout the 2 weeks that he's there with his crew, and they dance, and they rap, and they throat sing, and they drum, and the elders are involved, and the youth are involved, and the parents are involved, the school is involved, and it's just all-encompassing, and it's just a beautiful way in which suicide is very high in that community, and so they're able to combat some of it with programs like this. And so I suggest you look up Arctic Hip Hop. There's a beautiful online book where you can see all of the pictures. Some of the contributing factors to the health disparities are that American Indians, Alaskan Natives have a unique relationship with the federal government due to historical conflict and subsequent treaties. So Native people have sovereignty, and I think that this is not something that everybody understands. Being Native American is not just being part of an ethnic group. It's not about civil rights. Being Native American is political. So we have a nation, Native American tribes have a nation-to-nation relationship with the United States government. So we're not considered ethnic groups to the United States government. We're considered domestic dependent nations. And so when there are policies that are created, those policies reflect that relationship. And we all know that nation-to-nation relationships can be extremely difficult to negotiate because there's a fight for resources and there's money exchanged in those relationships. And so understanding sovereignty is important because Native American groups of Native Americans, that's not just an ethnic group. It's a political group. It's a nation, individual nations together. There's also limited or no access to Indian health services or just health services in general. Reservation versus rancheria. So I put this here because everybody always asks, well, what's a reservation and what's a rancheria? If we talk about California, and one of the tribes actually the only tribe in Sacramento County, is Wilton Rancheria. And if you think about other Shingle Springs Rancheria, in California, our reservations are called rancherias. And the reason for that is because reservations in other parts of the United States were actually prisoner of war camps. There was war happening in those other states with Indian tribes. And so when they would round up Indian people, say in North Dakota and South Dakota, for instance, and they would put them on this reservation, they were prisoners of war. Babies, elders, children, women, men, everyone, prisoners of war on these reservations. California's history is a little different. We had the mission system, and then, California was a part of Mexico, and then the gold rush happened, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But in California, a rancheria, even though it acts as a reservation, it was literally land set aside for homeless Indians. And so I'm going to be a little brutal and say, well, we didn't kill all of them, so we had to set aside some land for the ones that were wandering around. And that's literally the way that it was talked about at that time when these rancherias were created. So these people that, were not killed by disease or just, acts of violence, they were considered just homeless people, and they had to find a place for them. And so that's why there's a difference between reservation and rancherias. However, what is common about them is that it creates geographic isolation. Economic factors and suspicion toward traditional spiritual beliefs are some of the reasons why health among American Indians and Alaska Natives, specifically from these reservations and rancherias, are poorer than other groups. Other factors that contribute to poorer health outcomes include cultural barriers, geographic isolation, inadequate sewage disposal, and economic factors. Some reservations are like third world countries. Don't let the casinos fool you. That's not the norm for tribal communities. And so I would suggest that if you had time to look up some of those reservations and look at the statistics and look at the ways of life for people. These are some more examples of health disparities. The infant death rate is the second highest in 2006. We have the highest rates of suicide and motor vehicle-related deaths, and the second highest rate due to drugs. And these are all realities, and these are things that we deal with on a daily basis, and that these programs that we're introducing you to are helping to change. In 2009, the prevalence of American Indian Alaska Native adults aged 18 years and older who did not complete high school represented the second largest prevalence. So there's a back and forth fight, I believe, between African Americans and American Indians on who has the highest dropout rate. Not a fight that you want to win, but it's the reality. One of the issues that we don't really bring up here, but it's something that I've fought for, is the mascot issue. California has huge numbers of high schools and middle schools who have Indian mascots, and what Indian mascots do to a young Native American person's self-esteem is that it's really detrimental, and people don't want to recognize it, but it is definitely a factor. I went to a high school that had an Indian mascot, and at that time I was young, didn't really understand everything, but I had a fellow student who fought the fight to get that mascot changed, and the atmosphere of being one of the Native American students on campus when that fight was being fought, it was scary. I remember being scared. I remember not knowing if I should say something, and that's not okay as a young person to have to go through that. And I can understand if somebody dropped out. I know that, you know, my brothers, they ended up going to continuation school for many of these factors. And so we get to my family. This is a picture of my family, and it's probably dark and cut off a little bit. But I just really like this picture because there are 5 generations in this picture. And they all stem from my great-grandma, and her name is Linda Martinez, and she's in the middle, and it was her 88th birthday. And she was a woman, she was a strong woman. She's an Esalen Ohlone woman. And she was able to, she grew up in Lemoore, California. That's where the family relocated to, you know, eventually after leaving the Monterey area. And, you know, she grew up in poverty. And she did some things that she had to do to make sure that her family would continue and thrive and have food and have a place to live. And so what she did was, when she was able to earn enough money, she bought some land in what is Harold, California, and her daughter bought the land next to her, and she basically created a ranch, and all of my family lived there. And when she died, she put the land in trust to the family and not to an individual person. And so I grew up on this ranch in Sacramento County, out in the rural areas, that my great-grandma, who struggled to survive and did many things that we may look down upon, but if we understand the struggle, we appreciate, so that this land would be available and this home would be available to her family. I also want you to recognize in this picture how we all look so different from each other. Mind you, this is 5 generations. So my great-grandma, my grandpa's in there, my dad, me, and then one of my cousins actually has the 5th generation. The little girl on the left side with the dark hair and white shirt was one of the 5th generation people. And so we all look so different. Some of us have dark hair, some of us have light hair, some of us don't have any hair. But we all come from the same woman. We're all Esalen. We all grew up in a community environment on this ranch that my grandmother left in trust to us. They still live there. My cousins, my aunts and uncles, they still live on this ranch. In fact, my parents just barely moved off the ranch. They had lived there for 30-plus years. But it's this place that we know is available and we can go there. And it was because of the resiliency. It was because of the struggle. It was because of just the pure desire to live as a human being and to be with your family that my Ohlone Esalen grandmother had, that we were able to do that. And so at this time, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for letting me share my words. Thank you for allowing me to share this picture. I hope that with what you hear today and through the following webinars that you see, wow, what a magnificent people, what a great bunch of human beings, and what great programs that they're doing for their communities. Thank you to Barbara and to Albert for being here with me today. And in my language, to say thank you, we say Nimasian el Pasaleki. And what it means is my heart feels good. And my heart really does feel good right now. And so I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Albert for the next portion of our webinar.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you. Come on, Melissa. Kanye Asis Albert, Kanye Miwak, Azumata Miwu. And I say, Majuxis Katina Miwu. So in my language, I'm Miwak, and I said, welcome to all of you, my people. In our way, we believe that we're all connected, that we're all interrelated, more than just as Native people, but just as a race of people. And so our people always believe that before contact, that no matter who you were, what color you were, we didn't differentiate because we felt like we were all related that way. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. My name is Albert Titman. I'm Miwok. I'm of the Bear Clan people. My people are from this region, Sacramento region, all the way up to the Yosemite Mountains. And as far as the coast of California, we have Coast Miwok also. And there's a history of how our people ended up along the coast of California. I want to say thank you again to Melissa, because Melissa is proof that our people are still here, that our people are resilient. And you'll hear that word over the next few webinars of resiliency, and you'll hear it, and you'll hear stories about how and why that word relates to our people. And I want to say thank you to Barbara Aragon, because Barbara is someone that I met years ago, and I have a lot of love and respect for her. And when we talk about our societies, we would look at Barbara as one of our elders. And I say that in a very respectful way, because she has wisdom, which is lived experience. She has knowledge that she's learned in life, but also in school. And she's a teacher, and she teaches around the United States on the topics that we're going to be discussing in this webinar and future webinars. And so with that, again, I want to say thank you, Kamo Barbara, for being one of my mentors. Thank all of you for allowing me to be a part of this webinar, this important webinar series. and CIMH for allowing me to be a facilitator. The first slide says everything is connected, and in our way, again, we believe that all things are connected. There is no separation from one another as human beings. There is no separation from the plants, the air, the water, the fire, Mother Earth, the stars, the moon, the sun. We believe all things are connected. And there's a term we use it's a universal term. I hear it across the United States. And, I want to make sure that, I emphasize that what Melissa was talking about, although, we've been classified as one group of people, we are unique, but we share a lot of similarities also. And there are some universal principles that we live by. And one of the terms you'll hear is all my relations. And all my relations speaks to exactly that. And more than just it speaking to we're all interrelated or connected, but it becomes a way of life, a way of thinking, a way of being, a belief system that's related to that. It has action associated with it. Everything is connected. In terms of this slide, we're going to talk about pre-contact, contact, post-contact, present day, and generations ahead. So what we're doing today and what we're doing for our future, for our children. Native people have lived healthy, balanced lifestyles for thousands of years. So pre-contact, we understood ecosystems. We understood that all things were connected. We related to those things. And one of the teachings that I was taught years back by one of our elders, is the Miwok elder, he's one of our spiritual leaders and ceremonial leaders, was my relationship to water. And I love to share this story because it taught me so much. And when we talk about these ecosystems, talking about all my relations, talking about our social environments and understanding that we had before contact, before European contact, this relationship with water was very, very powerful teaching mechanism. So I went to my elder and I wanted to talk to him about some issues I was having in my own relationship with my wife, and my wife and I have been together 22 years this year. And I went to the elder, and I brought him some honey and some tobacco, some traditional gifts, because he's the leader of one of our bear ceremonies. And so, as bear dancer, honey and salmon, those are the gifts we bring, and that tobacco was used for not smoking, but for offerings ceremonially to the fire, to the water. And when I went and talked with this elder, in terms of that next bullet point, culture is shared meaning, shared values, spirituality, traditions, language, customs, art, symbols, and we'll get into a little bit more of that later. But when I went to sit with this elder, I sat with him for the whole day. We watched the sunrise. We shared breakfast. He took his gifts. He talked about his life briefly. He talked about his life in boarding school, which we'll talk about later. And then we went outside, and he lives in this pristine location up in Mariposa County, and I don't know if you're familiar, but it's very beautiful up there in the springtime. And we were amongst the cottonwoods and the oak trees, and the hawk were flying above us. And as I shared what my issue was, he listened attentively. He sat there very serene. And when it came his time to respond, he had his eagle feathers. He had his medicines. It was we use wormwood in California. We call it kachina, which literally translates to medicine. And so he burned the medicine. He cleaned me up with the smoke. And the smoke, for those of you who don't know, and I'll share a little bit about that, is smoke is our prayer. We see the smoke. We believe the smoke carries our prayer. Nothing can stop the smoke. It permeates all things. So when we see and we pray with that, we believe, we have faith that our prayers are being carried to the Creator. So he cleaned me up. We sat there, in discussion, and he began to tell me about my relationship with water. He asked me, Albert, do you understand your relationship with water? And I've been on this planet a number of years, and I thought, oh yeah, I think I do. I drink water. I shower with water. He said, no, do you understand your relationship with water? And as I sat and listened, I began to realize I don't believe I truly understood my relationship with water. And he started talking about the importance of water in our lives, that without water, we don't exist. Water is the blood of Mother Earth. It flows through her veins. That water is feminine. And he gave me some lessons to take home. And one of the lessons was that every time I came in contact with water, I should offer gratitude. I should say thank you. And I thought, wow, okay, that's no problem. I can do that, And we, we ate dinner. We sang songs. He taught me a few songs ceremonially, and then I went on my way. And the very next day, as I was driving home, and I was with my other spiritual leader driving home, I couldn't help but just keep thinking about, okay, how's that going to look? What am I going to do? And the next morning, I woke up and I said thank you to the Creator. I made my morning offering, faced the morning sun, that east direction. And I don't know about you, but the first thing I do in the morning is I go to the bathroom. In modern day, we have toilets, and we go use the restroom. And after I did what I had to do, I flushed the toilet, and right away, in my mind, I'm thinking, there's water. And so I said thank you to water, and I offered gratitude to the water. And I was thinking, man, there's that lesson, because in the commode, water is cleansing. It's taking that what our body has left toxically, and it's taking it away and it's cleansing it. And we've designed ways to take that and clean it even more, sanitation. And so the lesson didn't stop there. I left the restroom, and the second thing I do in the morning is I make a pot of coffee. I love coffee. And as I went to make that pot of coffee, again, there was water. And, and then after coffee, I went and ran the shower, and again, there was water. And so my point is, in that lesson, that teaching from our elder, and this year our elder is 82 years old, and he's still dancing. He's pretty healthy for an 82-year-old Miwok man. And we'll talk about, and Melissa talked about some of those health disparities. He's blessed to still be with us, and we're blessed to have him. And my lesson didn't stop there. So I reported back to my elder, and I told him what I had experienced, and then he gave me another lesson. And the lesson was to go down by the river and to sit and listen to the river. What is the river telling you? What is it saying to you? Then he said, get in the water and connect to the water that way. And the lessons went on. And after a month, we went back and we sat for another day, and we talked about what the lessons were. And after, I wrote them down and shared them with him, it was amazing how that lesson taught me about my relationship with my wife. It was so powerful. And I didn't see it at that time, and that was about 8 years ago. And it's amazing how my relationship with my wife has prospered since that time. And it taught me that, without my wife, who's my better half and the mother of my children, that she is sacred, just like water, that I need to learn to respect her just like I respect the river, because the first time I jumped into the river, I almost drowned. I didn't think about the undertow. I walked in there. I was by myself, and I really struggled to swim to the river's edge to get out. And there have been some times where I've said some things to my wife that hurt her feelings, and she said some things back, and I was hurt. And so that whole idea of the relationship to water, respecting it, it really taught me that I need to respect my wife that way. And then the lessons went on and on. So my My point is that we had these things in place. We understood before contact how to live amongst one another, how to be, how to interrelate. We had our songs, we had our ceremonies, we had our birthing ceremonies, we had our rites of passage ceremonies. We understood what foods to eat. You know, one of the slides, it says that our cultures and traditions are science-based and included systematic methods for prevention, intervention, treatment, and recovery support. So we say, man, culture is those things. It is prevention. It is intervention. It is treatment. And it was science-based. You know, we had those people in our communities that were trained over generations to understand the use of plants, to understand the use of our animal relatives, to understand the use of water and fire. We had those things in place. Traditionally, again, our cultures had counselors, we had doctors, we had psychiatrists, and we had medicines. So you can't see it, but sitting here in front of us, we have our altar, and our altar has different medicines. And some of the medicines are sage, we have angelica root, we have from our elderberry tree a clapper stick, which is the traditional instrument we use for singing our songs. We have those things. Those things were taught. We knew that, and we're still using them today, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So pre-contact, we had society intact. Tribal priorities and strategies were designed according to local scientific data related to the bioregion, the history related to creation, emergence, values, and culture. Once again, each one of our tribes in their uniqueness, we understood our relationship to our region. And so in that understanding of, let's say, for example, our Miwok family here in Sacramento, we understood our relationship to the river. We have the Sacramento River. We understood what plants that were there for us to wild plants that were there for us to harvest and survive with. We understood our relationship to the deer and the run of the salmon. So we understood in our region how to survive. And so each one of us in that understanding also had an understanding of our creation and our emergence, how we became to be as a people. And I won't go into too much detail about our creation stories because our creation story is 3 hours long. And so to get into telling that story would take a whole nother webinar. But really, what do our stories mean? Their connection, a relationship with the earth and land. Exactly what we were talking about. Our creation stories, they taught us about the area we were created in. They taught us about the relationship to all things. Our Miwok creation story, it starts with coyote. Turtle is a part of our creation story. Bear is a part of our creation story. Hawk, golden eagle. Water is a part of our creation story. The Great Flood was a part of our creation story. There's a hill up in Jackson, Ione area that we can go to that our ancestors have taught over generations where our creation occurred. It's very powerful. So there's that region that I can drive up to. It takes about an hour. That when I get to the top of that peak, is very, very ceremonial, very spiritual, and we've actually hiked there as a family, as a people, and had our elder teach us this creation story and talk about that story, and we had ceremony there. It's very emotional also. And when you get to, and when we think about, let's say, Christianity and Genesis and the whole idea of Adam and Eve, for us, that's the equivalent. There's nothing different. And so when you get to experience that after being raised in an environment that tried to strip you of all those things, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, it's very uplifting, and it what's the term I'm looking for? It just helps solidify that identity of being a Miwok person. And so the creation stories taught balance and reciprocity, so that in life, when we think about our native cultures and across cultures within our native people, man, the teachings are about balance. They're about harmony. They're about that interconnection to all things. And there is a give and a take in that balance. We call it polarity system, reciprocity, right? And we think about that, you know, in other cultures, like the yin and yang of life, that there's, with the good, there's the bad, and we learn from both. We relate to both. And so the creation stories help teach that. It helps teach us that bond with other relatives, human and non-human. Again, so important that we reiterate that fact about our relationship to all things, including the insects, right? Including the insects, that we all have a role in life. There was a time one of the elders taught about we spoke the same language as the animals. We could relate and talk to the water and the air and the fire. There was communication that happened, and it was nonverbal. It was more spiritual, right? Communication. And so we spoke the same language. We could understand one another that way. And some of the relatives say, we still do that today, but you have to go back, and you have to learn, and you have to be open-minded and believe in that. Creation stories set foundations and principles for society, which we talked about, but some of those principles, spiritual principles, are being honest, are having true courage, are forgiveness and understanding, right? Being of service, helping others, being a teacher and being teachable. Those are some of the principles that we live by today as Native people that were there all along. So, next slide. Three major components of indigenous identity: language, orality, connection to culture. In Esalen, and I'll refer to my colleague Melissa because she's our people, Esalen people, the word alpa means to speak and to pray. This is an important example of how indigenous language not only imply meanings but create relationships. The words that we speak carry as much power as prayer. So in our languages, including the Miwok language, in the Miwok language, you know, we say Josaleli Kanaska, which roughly translates to the creator of all. And so when we pray, we say Josaleli Kanaska. We're saying, if I say thank you, Kamo, I'm saying thank you to the creator of all things. And it's more than just saying thank you to the creator of all things. It's spiritual. It's a prayer. And so in many of our languages, cross languages, cross cultures, our language wasn't just speaking and saying hello. It had depth. It had true meaning. It had, again, like the creation stories, a connection to all things being interconnected. Again, all my relations, reciprocal relationships, understanding our relationship to Mother Earth, to the land, historical experience of colonization and trauma. And so we get to contact, and first contact. And scientific research and oral tradition verify pre-Columbian contact. So there is evidence of contact between Polynesians and the Chumash, Gabrieno of the Southern California between 500 and 700 AD. So this is long before 1492 and Christopher Columbus. You know, we hear stories about Christopher Columbus and how he discovered America, but this wasn't so. Christopher Columbus was way off in the first place, and there's already scientific research that proves that the Gabrieno and the Chumash had already contact between Polynesians. An example, the advanced sewn plank canoe design, which is used throughout Polynesian islands but is known in North America except for those two tribes. The Chumash word for sewn plank canoe, tomo'olo, may have derived from kama'alu, which I hope I'm saying that correctly because I'm not Polynesian, but is the word for redwood logs, which is what the canoe was made out And so there is that research and that history that, that proves there was contact long before the arrival of Christopher Columbus. Contact was not an abrupt incident. The impact would occur over hundreds of years. So first contact didn't just happen, and that's what happened. It happened over time, and we'll say over 500 years. Contribution to European survival on this continent is attributed directly to indigenous peoples. So agriculture, we had that, and the first arrivers, the European arrivers, they benefited from that. And so for those first tribes, they taught them agriculture, language, government, science, chemists, biologists, environmentalists, skilled herbalists and doctors, and even architecture. And amongst tribes, we had those things in place. We had government in place. We had our scientists and our biologists, especially our environmentalists. Architecture, man, beautiful structures, our longhouses, our roundhouses, our teepees. I mean, you think, and the list goes on. And we had bark houses here in California, in Miwok. We call them umache, bark houses, where a number of our people dwelt, and some of them were subterranean. Impact, contact would change the lives of Native peoples forever. And this is where we start getting into some of the more historical periods of trauma. And we won't go in depth because this is a very, very traumatic period for our people. And for me, it hits home. And, you know, I've done a lot of work in this area just on my own healing. And I'll share a story. I know we're running short of time, but I'll share a story. So colonization. So first contact period, 1492, we'll say, was that period of colonization. And it was a period of time where our people, again, after first contact, many wars, lost battles, were, as Melissa put it earlier, rounded up and placed in, you know, we'll say concentration camps, prison camps, reservations, and begin that whole process of colonization and stripping them of their rights to hunt, rights to fish, and at some point language. Devastation to the environment period. Genocide and extermination period. Man, we could get into some really serious detail on genocidal attempts, but if you look at articles of war through the United Nations and you go down categorically one by one by one, you will see that every article of war through the United Nations, the United States, the articles of war that talk about genocide, the United States put that on every one of our Native people from the East Coast to the West Coast. So genocide, it happened. It's not something that we say lightly. It's something that happened. And when we take a deeper look, and maybe Dr. Art will go into more detail, it's still happening today, believe it or not. And so extermination period. Subjugation and reservation period. We just talked about that. Melissa talked briefly about that, the difference between reservation and rancheria. There was that period of time where our people were moved from their own land and placed in reservations. Missionary period. And Melissa talked about the current 4th grade mission projects continue today, and she talked about the impacts of her people, which I love her example because it speaks directly to the mission period here in California and how it devastated our coast people. And there's still signs today that that period, it still affects our people today. And I was at a ceremony not long ago on the coast with some of our Pomo people, and in their ceremonial song, they use the term saint in the song, which I thought powerful but interesting, because as I'm learning about historical impact and intergenerational impacts, that song, and when I went up and talked to the elders, it is a song that was taught by her grandmother, and when you think, it goes back to the mission period of, you know, the Catholic missions, and that I forget the name of the song, the saint. It was praying to a certain saint, but it was mixed in with the Pomo song. And I thought, very interesting. But again, it's a symbol and sign of the missionary period, which is historical impacts. Forced relocation and termination period. So there was a period where in the United States of America, where many of our tribes, and there was many Trail of Tears. So we hear about the Cherokee Trail of Tears, where they were forcefully removed from their original land on the East Coast, marched 1,500 miles, to Oklahoma and North Carolina, and forced marched, which meant they walked. They had to walk. And the story is that half of the people on that march died along the way. So we're talking women, children, elders, men. Most of the warriors had already been killed off, and they were forced marched 1,500 miles. Think about that, forced marched. And they were given rations to survive. If they got sick, they were left to die. They weren't treated. And so half of the people were lost. I mean, that in and of itself, in the narrowest definition, is genocide. And that was an act of Congress. And so the president at that time signed that act to forcefully relocate our people. It happened here in California also. Boarding school period. And I really like to spend some time on the boarding school period because,
You have another slide for that.
And we'll talk about that. Removal of children period. Next slide, please. Diseases. By 1640, epidemic diseases such as smallpox and measles wiped out approximately 90% of Indian populations. Mass extermination by disease was federal policy. So there were blankets distributed to the Mandan people that had been exposed to smallpox that were purposely given to the Mandan people, but not just the Mandan people who are what some will refer to as Sioux people, but there was Lakota, Dakota, a number of other Plains tribes, the Cheyenne, the Arapaho. They also received those blankets filled with smallpox. Again, 90% of the population that received those blankets, they died. Again, patently genocidal. Massacres, war, and violence. So massacres were carried out in all places of North, Central, and South America. In California, the decreases from about 250,000 to less than 20,000 is primarily due to cruelties and massacres perpetrated by miners and early settlers. You know, we hear about Wounded Knee and the massacres there. We hear about Sand Creek massacres where hundreds of natives were brutally murdered and slaughtered. But here in California, we had our Clear Lake, right up in Clear Lake, we call Bloody Island, and there's Pomo people there. And I'm not sure that many of you know or understand that there was that massacre that occurred there on Bloody Island, where more than 300 Pomo men, women, and children were brutally slaughtered and removed from the land just for the sake of owning that land. And in Round Valley, they had a longest walk. They call it the Numcult Walk, which pretty much means the longest walk. In Round Valley, there's 8 different tribes in what is now known as Round Valley, Rancheria or Reservation. But those 8 tribes weren't originally from there. They were forcefully removed from their lands along the coast of California and forced to survive together on this, what is a beautiful location now when we look at it. Then it was a place for them to, they were hoped that they would not survive there. Many of these tribes didn't even get along, and so they were forced to live amongst one another when historically they didn't get along. And so there was the hope that they would end up killing each other off also. Different perspectives of war, increased intertribal warfare disputes, exactly what we're talking about there that happened at Round Valley. And the interesting thing about that is I did a presentation up there not long ago. We did a healing workshop. It was a 3-day workshop, and we had about 60 tribal members there. And one of the issues that had come up for the current generation was the long-standing feuds amongst tribes that still existed over these generations. And so the increased intertribal warfare, it still exists today, and that's one of the things we'll be talking about that we're healing from. One of the most famous quotes concerning extermination of Indians was made by a famous general in the U.S. Army, General Philip Sheridan. And his quote was, "The only good Indian I ever saw was a dead Indian," or was dead. There are so many other quotes that we could quote, but that just gives you an example of the history and the mindset of the government against Native people. It's, again, speaks to our resiliency. We're still here, even though genocide has happened. Exploitation attempted to civilize Indians. Spanish missions in California are an example of religious impact of colonialism. I just gave a brief example of it still exists today in some of the ceremonies. You hear the language. Some of many of our mission people, and there's a number of Pomo tribes that I get to interact with and relate with that speak Spanish. They speak Spanish, and they're not even Mexican, but they speak Spanish. And so there's interesting when you have a group of people who are not Spanish, but somewhere in their history they learned how to speak Spanish. And it's a direct relationship to the impacts of historical trauma and the Spanish missions here in California. Displacement and disruption of culture. So geographic displacement and disruption of lifeways resulted from the European colonization of America. In the United States, the relocation of Native Americans resulting in the policies of Indian removal and the reservation system created a disruption. Again, we talked about the forced removal, the forced relocation, the longest walks. There are harmful social side effects of ethnic cleansing policies. And so, again, the impact of removing one from his traditional land, removing him to a place where he has no rights to fish, hunt, in some places even practice their religious right, man, it has an effect on one's self-esteem, on how they look at themselves, their culture. This next slide, you see boarding school. Boarding school is the forced removal based on programs developed for prisons. The number one boarding school in that time was the Carlisle Indian Boarding School. And Officer Pratt, who was a military mindset that in that act forcefully removed Native children from their home. And you see the picture up there of more than 500 Native youth. That picture, there's a grave on one side where there's 102 headstones. Half of them have no names on them. And the story is that half of those children that went to Carlisle boarding school never came home. And some of them were never identified, so they don't even know if they survived or if they were killed and buried somewhere. That's patently genocide in the narrowest of definitions, again, boarding school era. So children were taken to boarding school, stripped from their parents, and stripped of their hair. And if you understand many of our tribes, my tribe, I know some of the Plains tribes, when you cut someone's hair, we're taught that when you cut our hair, we only cut our hair for a number of reasons. And one of them is death of a relative, of a close relative, maybe our grandma or our mother. And so many of these kids whose hair were cut, they were left crying just as a result of that, because they had no idea if their mother or their grandmother had been killed or was dead. And so they cried for days in mourning just because they got their hair cut. I mean, it's a cultural teaching. They were stripped of their language, the only language many of them ever knew. And you imagine being raised in this language, in this culture, where this is how you communicate. Our language is our connection to all things. And so, again, loss of culture, family, spirituality, so that when you remove children from their home, and I imagine this myself, and, just over the last week, again, I'm raising teenagers, and, with my wife, I was sharing with them, again, I'm gonna present this, and I've taught my children this just to help them understand the history of our people and the impacts, why we are the way we are. And when we were sitting discussing, again, I imagined, what if the government came in today and just pulled my children out, and there was nothing I can do, came in fully armed, and said, we're taking your kids and we're going to strip them of any semblance of their culture, of who they are as Miwok. And I got emotional again, because that's exactly what happened to my people. That's exactly what happened to me. And I don't sit in a victim mentality anymore, because I've understand, and I have done some work to really understand why we ended up the way we are. And for me, it goes back one generation. My father was taken away at 5 years old from my grandparents and placed in a boarding school on the other side of Mariposa. And it was a Catholic boarding school. And my father was raised there from the age of 5 years old until 12 years old. And he wasn't alone. I had, 4 other uncles and an auntie. They were all forcefully taken from my grandfather, who, by the way, was also a product of boarding school. He was a Sherman boarding school, and he was raised there. And so my father was raised there, and during that time, he had been molested, he had been beaten, he had been forced to pray differently than we normally prayed. He had been forced to learn this new language, and they fought back. And when he became 5 years old, 12 years old, they fought back. And so thinking about that and how that impacted my life, it stripped us of any idea of what it meant to be Miwok. The lack of family bonding, he had no parenting skills. He didn't know what it meant to be a father because he wasn't raised by a Miwok father. He was raised by a system that abused him. Abnormal dysfunction becomes what's normal. In his life, he fought society. He had this deep-seated hate. His normal was being angry and fighting back. He had no idea of what it meant to be, what society deems as normal. As a Miwok person, it destroyed his self-image. So he had no idea of what it meant to be Miwok because the system had robbed him of that. And so when he tried to assimilate back into society, what you found was this angry, aggressive, violent, but really broken man. Lateral oppression. Not only was he violent to the society, but he became violent to my mother. There was domestic violence. He became violent to others in the community. And that's what happens. So when you fight a system long enough and you realize I'm not going to win, you end up taking it out on each other. Loss of economies and tribal governments, acceptance of outside behaviors, self-medication, mental illness, health disparities. When we talk about self-medication, we start to talk about addiction issues, alcoholism, mental illness, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. One of my uncles would end up in the psychiatric hospital, diagnosed as schizophrenic, direct result of colonization and historical impacts. So again, historical trauma is cumulative emotional and psychological wounding over the lifespan, across generations, emanating from massive group trauma. Natives have experienced that for over 500 years, enduring physical, emotional, social, spiritual genocide from European and American colonist policies. Mental health disparities, post-traumatic disorder, PTSD, intergenerational trauma, post-colonial stress disorder, wounding of the soul. And, I like to quote Dr. Duran, and he wrote a book, Healing the Soul Wound. And it's very powerful because that's the direct result of historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, colonization. The transmission of that, lateral oppression, lateral violence, those things are all interrelated to post-contact and the mental health disparities that we are experiencing in Native communities today. Addiction issues, suicide at an all-time high amongst our youth, 10 times the national average. Just over the past 2 years, we lost 6 of our Miwok kids to suicide. And in some cases, they just wasn't talked about. Nobody said anything. It wasn't, nobody in our community even knew that anything was going on within that family. Present day, and we're running out of time, so I want to talk about present day. Everything again is interrelated. We're going back to the future, we say, back to culture, back to this whole idea of health and wellness, being connected to our sense of self. Who we are as Native people. We're still here. We're resilient. As we sit here now and we talk about it, I get a little emotional because the culture saved my life. As a direct result of the intergenerational trauma and understanding what that is, how that impacted our people, that's who we are now. I understand we're all interrelated that way. The results of colonization and genocide, historical trauma, loss of language and culture, we're rising above that. And we're proof again today that we're still here. We're doing that. The revitalization, the maintenance and continual practice of our culture is vital to achieving and maintaining optimal wellness. Living in two worlds. So we talk about living in both worlds, that we have to survive in the dominant society. There's just no way around that. But it doesn't mean we have to lose who we are. Because who we are, we celebrate it. It's a value. It's a life way. And that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about healing from these things that have happened. When we're talking about holistic approach to wellness, emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, relational, economical, where we have those things in place. We have curriculums that are in place. We have the community-defined practices, those things that we've always had that have helped us pre-contact, we're going back to. And we're asking that those things be recognized as modalities of treatment, because we're doing that. In our program, we take our people to the roundhouse ceremonies, to the sweat lodge. We talk about connecting to this until you can connect to, let's say, your Esalen ways or your Dene ways, because we do have a lot of inner tribes that come to the clinic for help. One of the things that we're teaching is the generations ahead. And one of the teachings you'll hear in the curriculums across Native community is imagination carries our vision to the 7th generation. So we're thriving. Our creation and emergent histories gave us the ability to imagine ourselves as Indian people in the 7th generation. So in what we're talking about here today, in the work that we're doing, in the lifestyle that we're living, we're planning for the next 7 generations. And when we think about the work we're doing is going to have an impact 7 generations from now, I won't be there to see it, but I know the work that I'm doing now is going to have an impact on my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, and so on and so forth. But I also understand 7 generations back that they prayed for us to be here doing what we're doing today. And when we go back 7 generations pre-contact, they knew. They had visions. We had dreamers that knew that we were going to experience what we've experienced as a people. And they prayed for us to survive. They prayed for our resiliency. And here we are talking about it in this webinar. It speaks to that, directly speaks to the prayer. So the life of a preteen, teenager, adult, mother, father, grandmother, warrior, elder, singer, all begin in that imagination, right? Who and how we envision ourselves to be for the next 7 generations. This picture right here is a picture of my family, and these are all my family, Miwok family, and our dance group. This is how we envision ourselves today. Those are my grandchildren there, my nieces and nephews, my chosen family that were all Miwok. On the right is our spiritual leader. He's our dance leader, and that's his wife, Teresa. Those are my relatives. In the back row are my nieces, and right in the middle, that's me. In the middle dancer that's kneeling down. And that's what we're speaking to. That's what I'm talking about when we start talking about the resiliency and healing for the future using curriculums. This isn't a curriculum. This has been here for thousands of years. This is what we're trying to hold on to. And, I am getting a little emotional here, but I'm asking you to recognize culture as prevention, culture as intervention, Culture is treatment. And that's my son, and that's my son in the middle, and that's my daughter on the right, and those are all my nieces there, and my nephew. And in the middle, it's my cousin. He's our ceremonial leader. And that's how we're living our life today. It's not a curriculum. And so before we go, I got a minute left.
Well, there we don't have any questions. So if there's anything else you would like to add about examples, whether at SNAC or what you else participate in as the revival of culture?
Yeah. Again, as part of that, you see the image on the screen of my family. At SNAC, we provide services, an array of services that help deal with the things that we're talking about here. We offer domestic violence services, and in that domestic violence program, we utilize a curriculum that's called Mending the Sacred Hoop. And Mending the Sacred Hoop, it talks about all these things that we're talking about here, the principles of life, the importance of using culture, how the culture, embedded in the culture, is the way of parenting. It's the way of relating to one another. It teaches the principles of honesty and forgiveness, of healthy communication, of helping one another, not destroying one another. It talks about the opposite. We talk about historical intergenerational trauma. We talked about lateral oppression in our groups. We talk about lateral violence in the domestic violence groups. So we have a group that's for batterers, and we also have a group that's for survivors, and it's a women's group. And so we utilize, again, curriculums that are culturally based. Carlos, who you'll get to see to meet in future webinars, we utilize the 12-step model. It's called the White Bison Medicine Wheel Teachings. Again, the medicine wheel teachings have been there for thousands of years. Now, modern time, AA has implemented these 12 steps, but there is proof that AA and, Dr. Bob and Bill, they borrowed from native tribes when creating the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there is some evidence to back that up. And so we use the curriculums of the medicine wheel teachings at the Native Health Center. And not only that, we also offer the sweat lodge ceremonies. We offer, we take clients to, powwows, which are more social, modern-day activities, but our roundhouse ceremony we call Hanji, that are California ceremonies. And so we take our clients to culturally based programs, but we offer the culturally based curriculums also.
Thank you, Albert. We're going to be offering a song. I just want to say a couple of words. I want to thank Melissa and Albert for wonderful presentations, and not only sharing data and historical information, but sharing their stories, their heart. What we know about healing from trauma is that you have to create safety, and that then you have to have a place to tell your story. And one of the reasons the title of this is telling our story is often that stories for Native people, Indigenous people, have been told from outside of our communities. And so I appreciate the opportunity for the presenters to tell their story. You'll hear that in subsequent webinars, that there will be a theme, there will be a thread of historical trauma. But also that there is the discussion and that move to the resiliency that is being reignited within community, or the revival, and it's really exciting. And so the safety is important, the ability to tell your story, but then also being reconnecting back to community. And so I think when we talk about recovering language, when we talk about taking clients or patients into the lodge, into ceremony, that's reconnecting to community. And so I look forward to Art Martinez next time, and also Kucha talking about the flower dance ceremony, and then also the evidence-based practices. So again, thank you both, and Albert is going to sing us out. Was there any questions? from the audience before?
Yeah. So this is Christy Higgins, and I just wanted to take a moment to also just thank all of you for your presentation and everything that you've shared from the heart. I look forward to hearing this song in just a moment. But I did want to make sure that we had an opportunity to respond to any questions from the participants. And there is one that I see that I'd like to share with you all and have you respond to. And then invite any other folks that may have questions to please use your question box to indicate those questions. So the one question that is listed is from someone who asks about altars and altar making as therapy. Do you have any information in regards to that?
Yeah, altar making, just historically amongst, and I would say amongst indigenous nations, not just here in the United States, that the use of altar has been around for thousands of years pre-contact. And so altars are important because it allows us to have set up a place that we can find a center, closeness, we'll say, to the Creator. And so altars are important even in their practice because in the work that I do with the clients that I get the opportunity to work with, even in my family, at home we have an altar. We have a family altar at home because it's that place where we can go to find spiritual center, find calmness, find serenity, to connect through prayer and song, a place where we can have our medicine that we use to help us heal emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. So I had a teacher, well, I still have her. She's still with me. She's 75 years old. She's a Cherokee woman. Her name is Shirley Rowland. And Shirley Rowland, 20 years ago, helped save my life from that being stuck in dominant society and not having a clue of what it meant to be Native. And she's the one that, the first one that showed me and taught me the importance of an altar. And she helped me design an altar based on Cherokee teaching because I had no clue at that time what it meant to be Miwok. And her teaching helped guide me back to this road of, we call it walking the red road, but to my people. And lo and behold, we have altars there too. So altars are important because it helps an individual, it helps a people, it helps a tribe connect spiritually. It helps you find that place of oneness, I believe. And that's how I've been taught to we say, Joselele Kanaska, which is the creator of all things. And you see in treatment, when you help, I just recently helped a client, he's been sober 2 years, he's transitioning back to his homeland, and I helped him. He said, Albert, I want to make an altar. I said, okay, we're going to help you make an altar. And, I taught him some things, what he needed to do specifically, and, I met with him last Friday, and he did what he needed to do, and he has his altar. It's made such an impact in his life, the cultural teachings, the curriculum-based teachings, and now having his own altar. He's got this newfound identity that for years, and this man is a grown man, he's almost 60 years old, that he didn't have growing up. And it's amazing, a 60-year-old man who's just now connecting to his identity as a native person. And he's got an altar now he can take back home with him, right? All right. Thank you. I can get long-winded, so sorry about that.
And this is Barbara, and I also have an altar at home. There are things that are from my tribe and in my practice, but often when I travel, people will give me things, medicine from their area, or if someone asks for prayer, maybe they're going through grief, that I might have a picture. It will remind me when I make a commitment to pray for someone. Then I'll ask them for something, whether it be a picture or whether it may be just something that person held at one time. To say, and I'll take that and I'll put it on my altar because it helps me live a life of integrity as far as when I make a commitment to pray for somebody, that I do that. And so there are not specific things that you have to have on your altar, but think about what your medicine is from your area. Do that investigation. Do that you know, we might have a mentor that can tell us, but then it should lead us further to, you know, to where our roots are, to, you know, what we know, whether it be, you know, the cornmeal, you know, from the Pueblos, or sweet pine, you know, from up north. And so look for what it is for you, but also think some of those things that people have just given me that are just modern things, but they meant something. I put those on my altar, and like I said, it helps me just really remember what I've committed to when I'm out doing this work.
And I want to add to that just a little bit, because Barbara touched on the grief, and a part of my healing was really learning to let go of unresolved grief. And one of the things for me was my grandmother had died years back, and I wasn't able to be at her services. You know, I was away, and so for me, at home, I have her picture on my altar, and her picture is there, and it's just a place that I can go when I need that spiritual connection, when I need to pray for myself, and it's just a reminder, there's Grandma. She's there in spirit. It still helps me, and it's a part of that. And that's exactly what I shared with this man that I explained is exactly what Barbara was talking about. That's what you need to do. Go find those things that have meaning to you. Go find those things that, you know, that you understand that are related to your people. And he's just on the beginning of that journey, so he's getting there. But, you know, I just wanted to add that.
Thank you for those responses. Very comprehensive. I see there's a few more questions. I'd like to ask one, and I'm going to combine a few different pieces to it. Y'all ready? It says, I'm curious that if I need mental health services and I do not live near a tribe or my tribe is out of state, how do I get reconnected to my community? Is there a resource that we can use when we have Indian patients that need services?
Okay, I'll answer that one. It kind of depends on what tribe you are, but the easiest way to answer that question is that there are urban Indian health services in many different areas throughout California that you can go to that will help you to create connections to your tribe or your community back home. In addition to that, I come from an Indian education background, and so there are Indian education programs and program educators that if you reach out to them, they will help you to connect in that way too. One of our local ones is Capital Area Indian Resources, and it's called Resources because they try to give you resources for the community that you live in. So Indian health services in your community, like the Native American health centers, the Indian education programs, and then we gave you our emails because we are saying if you have a question, feel free to email us, and we can definitely send you, you know, community resource lists for the area that you live in, as long as we, you know, we have connections to those things. So feel free to email us with those questions.
Thank you for offering that to all the participants. I'm sure you'll get contacted by many of them. I see another question, and I may mispronounce the name, so I apologize in advance, but it's Zayante boarding schools. Where are these people now? Also called by the Spanish costeños. Does that make sense?
Costeñoans?
Yes.
Yeah.
Where are these people now? That's something that, I mean, Costeñoan people, that would be me. That's a term that's used for any of the people on the coast, so Ohlone people, Estelen people. I would have to do more research about where those people from Zayante boarding schools are, and that's definitely something you can email me about. I'm very interested now in finding the answer to that question.
Okay, great. Another one is, what are you doing for incorporating or adapting the new scientific achievements into this rich culture that have realized the interconnectedness from the beginning?
Can you repeat the question?
About to say, would it help if I repeated it?
Yes.
Yeah.
What are you doing for incorporating or adapting new scientific achievements into this rich culture that has realized the interconnectedness from the beginning?
I feel like the question, I feel like because of assimilation, all of us who are a part of these programs, we already have those. We are trained with those scientific achievements already. The thing that we strive to do is to put our culture into them and make them relate in that way and connect them in that way that is relevant to us as Miwok people, as Pueblo people, as SLN people. That would be my best way to answer that. I believe that those new scientific achievements are something that we already have to do based on our licensure at the places that we work. We're well trained in those things. Our focus is to make culture be a part of those things, of those advancements.
I also think that there are research, native research communities. We look at in Washington State with Bonnie Duran and the group there that are really doing a lot of research, the University of New Mexico, and so there are those places, also tribal colleges, that as they go back and not only do the research, but also begin to look at what we see as native, the non-native research, and how many times there has been research in among native communities, and there might be theories that are well known that come out of there, but it was never attributed to native people. I know with the Bacunni Nation, the Blackfeet tribes, I have a dear friend, John Bird, and I know it's not that shares about how Maslow went up and spent time in those tribes, and out of what we know as Maslow's theory really came out of his time when he spent with those tribes up in Canada and observed how they raised children and what were the things, what needed to be in place to raise a balanced person. And so I think many times the native-specific research organizations and universities and tribal colleges are putting that word out there, that there has been a lot of research and a lot of scientific evidence by researchers in the past was really based on traditional and indigenous practice.
And just to add to that, because they're both correct in their response, but to add to that, when we talk about the curriculums, and you'll get an opportunity when you attend the webinars coming up, is they are scientific based. And when you look at Agona, you could say, oh, social model. You could see COG-B. So at our center, at Sacramento Native American Health Center, we also have licensed clinical social workers there, and they are well trained in scientific methods of providing mental health therapies and treatments. And we, like Melissa said, we work to include the culture when it is asked for and when it's appropriate. So we do that. But the curriculums are already scientifically based, and in terms of promising practice, evidence-based practice, or community-defined practice, we're moving in that direction. But it's been there the whole time. The culture, embedded in culture, and I think this is difficult for some people to grasp, even Native people. Embedded in the culture were the interventions, were the treatments, were the prevention. It was there. And so we're trying to find a way to get back to that. And like Barbara was saying, science is already moving in that direction in Indian country. So thank you.
Thank you. I see another question here. It says, are there any programs or suggestions for American Indian youth or young adults who are not as strongly rooted in his or her American Indian culture and identity, and more with the culture of their environment, for example, Latino or white?
I think all of these programs that we talk about are meant for human beings. And Albert said this, that it's, all my relations. That doesn't just mean, all my tribal relations. It means all human beings. So whether you're Latino, and if you're Latino, you're indigenous probably, they can, Latino kids, white kids, African American kids, youth, they can participate in these programs just as easily as as Native Americans. I'm sitting here, and me and Albert, we're both part Mexicans, and so it doesn't take away from any of it. It's all about finding that culture. So if they're not rooted in that culture, then they can find it through these programs, and they'll find it in a way that's appropriate for them. And that was my example with the Arctic hip hop. Hip hop is not necessarily seen as being Native American culture, but there are elements of hip hop, music, dance, storytelling that are Native American culture, that are indigenous to us as Native people. And so you can use those things to find yourself, to find those roots, to connect.
And when you, on that third webinar on March 19th, when there's the presentation on both the white bison and the Gona, the gathering of Native Americans, I went and spent some time in Guam probably 2 summers ago because the people from the Pacific Islands had seen a presentation on the Gona or participated on some level, and they felt this fits for us. And so there was SAMHSA sponsored myself and a young woman to go over, and we did a training of facilitators for the people from the Pacific Islands. And so it was Hawaii, it was Guam, but it was also Palau, it was Micronesia. And so we went over those 4 themes of the Gona, which the first is belonging, the second is mastery, looking at your story and also what holds us back. Looking at historical trauma is in mastery. And then in the third is interdependence, the recognition, like Albert was saying, that we're all connected. And that not only connected, but we have a responsibility to one another. And then the fourth, theme is generosity, that we have to give back. That part of it. So those 4 themes they recognize, even though we might say that they're Pacific Islander cultures. Yes, they are, but they're indigenous people, and they recognize that. And so as they went through, the training of facilitators, we kept putting back to them. So we did, they built an altar, but they might have a lei on there. They may have woven mats on there, and so it looked different, but it was the same purpose. The spirit of it was still there. And sometimes they would want to say, oh, the Gona, and they, no, don't name it the Gona. What is your name? What would you call this? And my understanding was last summer that there was a Gona type event, and I don't recall the term that they used, but they used those same 4 themes because they're human needs. And so I don't want to take Gail Zepeda's thunder because she's going to talk specifically about the Gona curriculum on that third webinar. But I want to just, just back up what Melissa is saying. These are human needs. And once you go through it and have an understanding of those, then you can really begin to search for what is your road and what is your roots. So thank you for the question. And I hope that answered it.
I want to add one more curriculum that won't be presented, and it's called HOPE, and it's an acronym that stands for Helping Our People Endure, and it's a youth prevention curriculum, and it is created by Clayton Small, and so you want to write that down. You can Google it; it'll come up. Clayton Small, HOPE acronym, Helping Our People Endure. It's another one, and it's pretty similar to Gona. I mean, Clayton was one of the, we'll say, Gona gurus. Barbara can talk more about that because she's one of our Gona gurus. Hey.
Okay. Some of the questions that are coming up, you all are, I think, responding to them, and we only have time probably to finish up just a couple more. But one of the questions was, so I'm going to just say a number of them right now. One is, can you repeat the specific title and name of the American Indian Youth Hip Hop Program? Can you also help folks identify where they can find the Gona curriculum? And then finally, the follow-up to the question that was posed before your most recent response, the person was indicating how challenging it is to be an ally, helping American Indian youth learn to appreciate their American Indian roots? So,
the name of the hip-hop thing was Arctic hip-hop, and it's just one of many that are springing up. There's Healing Through Hip-Hop, Res Heads does something, Savage Family does lyrical healing. I do hip-hop dance classes that have to do with wellness and life skills in addition to that. What was the other part? Let's see. Oh, the GONA curriculum. Where can we get the GONA curriculum?
If you want to email me, it's this is Barbara speaking. That was Melissa. If you want to email me, I can send you a copy, electronic version of the GONA curriculum. And also there's technical assistance available. And also there are different organizations, PA organizations often have webinars on GONAs. And if you get on that listserv, then they will email you, or sometimes they're listed on Facebook. But there are a number of webinars that will share how to put a GONA together and how to revise it specifically for your community and your tribe.
I think the third part was, thank you, Barbara, was it's a challenge being an ally, helping American Indian youth learn and appreciate their culture. It can be a challenge, and I think that for me, when I work with youth, the idea is that you let them design the way that you're going to work with them. And so you find something that they're interested in, and you design the curriculum around that. And I think that that's what my passion with this hip-hop thing is, because kids were interested in rapping, kids were interested in dancing and graffiti, and I knew that it was connected to my indigenous culture and that I could find a way to make it relate to them and to make it be more than just a dance or a rap, that they could tell their story in their rap, that they could talk about historical trauma in their rap, that when they danced, the passion and the power that they felt with their bodies was the same as when they would go do their Miwok dancing, that energy is the same, the connection to the ground is the same when you dance. And so you have to find something that they really like. I don't, depending on what area you're from, there are groups of youth that have a passion for something, and use that and let the culture melt into it, but use that to get them interested. And it is a challenge. But if we get just like those 5 kids to do it, it's worth the challenge. We can't reach 100 kids at a time. Sometimes it's only 3. Sometimes it's 10. But if we can do it, like, that's what makes me feel good when I do it, is to see them understand what they're doing as young people.
And to add to that, in terms of being an ally, I have presented at different schools, different organizations in Sacramento, the Bay Area, in helping those programs to build that relationship with their native youth or students. And so I'd be willing to be your ally.
Me too.
In helping you to make that connection.
Okay, great. So I think we have time maybe for one last question and comment. There was a comment indicating that Native Youth Leadership developed by Native Wellness Institute is also available as a resource.
And it's awesome.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. So you're familiar.
Yes, we will promote the Wellness Institute.
Yes.
We promote anyone doing wellness work in Indian country because we're all needed to do it.
In the Native Wellness Institute, you can actually Google that, and it'll come up, and they do amazing TA. They have cultural-based curriculums also.
Right. So I think the last question that we have an opportunity to respond to very quickly is someone mentioned that one of the presenters spoke about her grandmother's work to establish a family land trust. Does this indicate that land was traditionally inherited through women in her tribe, And if so, was this the tradition in other Native American tribes? My family had land in Missouri, which was inherited by my paternal grandmother.
That is not what I was alluding to, but what I will say to semi-answer that question is that traditionally nobody owned the land, and so it didn't need to be inherited. This land that my grandmother and her daughter bought was to create a communal living space for our family and a place that people can go in refuge, basically. So it really didn't have anything to do with land inheritance. And, you know, traditionally we didn't own land. We belonged to the land.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. What I would love to do is take this moment as we are coming to a close on our time to thank all of you, all the attendees who participated in the webinar for your questions. And once again, want to thank our incredible presenters, Dr. Melissa Leal, Mr. Albert Titman, and Ms. Barbara Aragon for this informative and heartfelt presentation and responses to questions. But we are at the end of our time.
Well, then we're going to, as people sign out, Albert wants to sing us out.
Okay. Before he does that, may I say a couple quick things? And then we'll end with song? Does that work?
Yes, that's true.
Thank you so much. So I did want to remind everyone, as Ms. Aragon has already been mentioning and the presenters today, about the upcoming webinars, which will finish up the Native American series on Wednesday, March 5th and Wednesday, March 19th, both from 10 to 12 p.m. Those will be followed by 3 webinars from the Asian Pacific Islander community in their webinar series. You can see and will be able to view all of these, at least the PowerPoints and hopefully the webinar recordings on the CIMH website or our YouTube channel. And we hope that you'll also consider joining us on May 30th, 2014 in Anaheim for our Building the Evidence Summit related to ethnic and cultural CDPs, community-defined practices. So with that, let's turn it over to Albert for a song, and then we will close out our broadcast.
True. I want to offer this Mountain Eagle song. I know my relative Barbara loves this song, and I love this song. And this Mountain Eagle song is actually a song from over the mountain that calls on the spirit of eagle to be with us. And eagle has this unique perspective of the world that we don't get to see unless we're in an airplane, and that's skewed at best. And so this Mountain Eagle song is from Paiute country, and the song really was created, if you've ever been down to Bishop, California, and if you knew the Stone family, which probably most of you don't, the song was really created in honoring the children that were suffering amongst that tribe at a time where they needed help, and they were crying. And they were crying to Eagle to come down and bring them food, to come down and help them in that way. And so I'm going to offer the song. Oh, thank you.